Hello and welcome to another D&D Stories. My name is Rob from Performance Check, and this
is a channel invasion! Ha!
oh, whew, oh, that was sore. That was. I'm not going to do that again. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, so let's get the awkward bit out of the way first. Who the hell is this guy and what is he doing on TheWriter's channel? Well, I had the good fortune to be talking with Tony, and we had a bit of a chat. I've been a huge fan of TheWriter for some time now. I find Tony's way of telling a story absolutely delightful. He relishes in the telling of the tale, and clearly adores the hobby he's been talking about all these years. His attitude is infectious, in a good way, obviously. And I was absolutely humbled to be offered this opportunity to say hi. As I said before, my name is Rob. I'm from the channel Performance Check. You can go and check out my channel if you like. I try and focus on making D&D or role-playing game campaigns in general more cinematic, more theatrical, more attention-grabbing, and also how to deliver clear and concise information to your players in a really cool way. Really makes the game slick and suspenseful. So if you want, go and check me out and subscribe. And don't worry if not, we're all friends here.
Or are we?
Also, if you hop onto my channel, whilst I've been invading TheWriter's channel, I've been foolish. All of my forces have sallied forth, and TheWriter's just bloody gone and invaded my channel. So if you want to see a really cool, exclusive video from TheWriter in the style of Performance Check, then head over there and give it a watch. That was that was really strange. What's going on with my mind? So without further ado, T has kindly asked me to tell you a D&D story, so that is what I shall do. So when me and Tony first started talking about this shared opportunity, this channel invasion, Tony obviously asked me to do a D&D story, and I thought to myself, that's going to be tricky, thinking about it. Reason being, I have a series on my channel called Lore Drop, which follows the canon of a series of long-running campaigns that I both ran and played in. And I thought to myself, I need like a one-shot. And thankfully, I've been blessed in the fact that I have mainly been involved in D&D campaigns in long-form storytelling, and almost all of them seem through to completion. So I had to really think hard about like a concise one shot that I could share with you guys here today on the channel TheWriter, and then it struck me like a bolt from the blue, just like that blue light that just emanated across the room. That was really strange. This is a story that I've decided to call The First Step. And that is because it is the story of and the story surrounding my very first Dungeons and Dragons experience. This story occurs in two universes, the real world and the fantasy world that we know and love, which is showcased in the hit role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. I was about 14, 15 years old. I know I was in year 9 at school. I understand that a lot of viewers here are from different countries, so I don't know how that works out to grades or anything like that. But I was 14, 15 years old. And at the time, I had a friend called Jack. Still do, actually. Still very good friends. Jack had a habit of introducing me to a lot of cool things. I have a lot to thank him for that in that regard. He was the first person that pressed a copy of the Elder Scrolls Morrowind into my hands, for example, and particular books and things like that. He was always on point for the material that he decided to share with me. And one day, mid tutor, we had like a tutor period where essentially we would come in after lunch break and we would sit there. The register would be taken by our tutor at the time to make sure we're all still there. And we just hang out for a bit before our first class of the afternoon. And Jack comes over and says, "Hey, Rob, how's it going?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's all right, man. How's it going?" Probably didn't speak like that when we were 14 years old, but never mind. And he says, "Listen, I was just wondering. A few of us have been talking, and we are putting together a little bit of a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And I'd heard of Dungeons and Dragons. I wasn't really sure what it was, though. This, I will add, is at the height of third edition, release. Like it was third edition. It was back in a big way. D&D was here to stay once again, and I was curious, and I said, "Well, what exactly is it?" And he says, "Well, it's kind of like a game that you can do anything in." I was like, "Do anything in? Really?" And I didn't believe him. I was like, What? Because my mind hadn't made the jump that it obviously needed to. I wasn't aware that there was this game that was based solely around storytelling. I was used to board games or video games. There was the line. That was the divide. And I said, "Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'll give it a go, I guess." He said, "Yeah, we'll make characters and stuff. It'll be great." I'm like, "Fantastic. Where's it going to happen?" "Oh, it's going to happen right here." And I was like, "What do you mean right here?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, there's like a D&D like club, a group that happens in our tutor room. Our tutor room happens to be a science lab. It's got the big, massive workbenches where science experiments would take place, with gas taps that stick out of it for Bunsen burners. Probably the most dangerous room in the school. Not that that concerned me. I wasn't like, "Oh my god, we're in a science lab." Nothing like that. Just I was just surprised that this was happening at school. I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, sure. The bell rings, and I'm like, well, let's talk about it, at length later on." "Sure, that's cool." It was at that exact moment that our conversation was interrupted, just as we were wrapping it up. "Is there something you would like to share with the class?" This voice echoes across the classroom. We freeze in terror. Every year, we would have a different teacher that would be our tutor. Every year, it would change. This particular year, year 9, we had a science teacher. Hence why we were in a science room, hence why our tutor room was a science lab. This teacher was called Mr. Brotherton, and he was without a doubt the most fearsome, terrifying man in the entire school. He was strict, and he was no nonsense, and he did not like talking. Just to explain briefly about Mr. Brotherton, this was a terrifying man. He was not only strict, but he relished in the anguish of his students. Looking back now, I can see what a genius this man was, but at the time, we were all terrified of him. Absolutely terrified. He could explode on the flip of a dime. He would just be calm, and then boom, you are getting the tongue lashing of your life. But like I said, he would relish in students' anguish. Like, I remember he demonstrated once how atoms joined by making two students that misbehave in class hold hands, okay, and walk around the school in front of all of the windows, leering faces of all of the kids in the other classes, looking out of the windows, pointing and laughing, with Mr. Brotherhood joining in. Like, this guy just was Machiavellian in his methods of punishment. So not only could this man destroy you by shouting at you, he could utterly embarrass and destroy any kind of reputation you may have at this school with his punishments. The man was untouchable, like a D&D villain, the overarching nemesis that puppeteers your player's destruction. So you can imagine mine and Jack's fear when that voice booms across the room. Is there anything you would like to share with the class? And me and Jack turn around, and Jack says, no, sir. I was just telling Rob about Dungeons and Dragons. And Mr. Brotherton stares at us. Horrified, we stare back. And then the strangest thing happens. This explosive man, this wild card, looks at us strangely, gives a single nod, and then goes back to his work. Now, you've got to remember that part. We'll come back to it later, but for now, we're going to skip ahead. Jack sits down with me, and we both create our characters. Now, I'm joining a group that are all starting for the first time, essentially. I think Jack might have played one other game beforehand. I could be wrong. But we're all fresh-eyed, and there's like 9 of us. Maybe 10. I don't remember. There's a lot of us. And we sit through character creation. And it takes a little while. It's 3rd edition. It's a bit more complex than 5th edition these days. And I devise my very first Dungeons and Dragons character. I come up with a character called Tyranno the Dwarf. I got the name Tyranno because it was written on my mountain bike. And I thought, dwarves like live in mountains. It kind of sounds like terrain, Tyranno. So, you know, whatever, Tyranno the Dwarf. And I will always remember Tyranno the Dwarf. He is a fighter. I remember he had chainmail armor, and he had a long sword. I now look back and think to myself, that's really weird. Like, you don't often think of dwarves primarily fighting with a sword. It's usually like an axe or a mace or a maul or something. But no, he had a long sword because as a kid, big fan of Star Wars and sword fighting in general. Really, like, I wanted a sword, you know. So I come up with Tyranno, this dwarf. Really, really simple sort of stories, backstories for them, really. I don't even really remember it. It was essentially, he was, I think he was just like a warrior out to prove himself, but I could be wrong. However, he decided he wanted to play a half-orc. I think he was called Grug. Grug the half-orc. There was another fella there called Gavin who totally like got the system. Like, Gavin was all into like higher mathematics and stuff, so he min-maxed. I'm not saying you need to be in higher mathematics to be able to min-max, but he totally min-maxed this half-elf like fighter. There was a fella named Alex who made a sorcerer, called it Zidane. He had a tail. He was basically the protagonist from Final Fantasy IX. If you've ever played that game, he was just that character as a sorcerer in D&D. There was also a girl called Jenna who played Druid. Another guy called Scott who played another dwarf. There were loads of us in this group. It was a really, really big group. And after a while, we were ready. After the immense amount of effort it took for all of us beginners to get round everyone's turn and to make sure that we all got our character sheets right, we were ready. The only thing that we needed was a DM. Now, there were a few different kids at the school that would sort of revolve, you know, running D&D, but none of them were available to do it. All of them had different games that they were running, and these would usually occur either in lunch hour or after school. So we're sat there in this science lab. We've just spent ages and ages and ages making these characters. Who's going to be our DM? And then all of a sudden, the door swings open and a figure sweeps into the science lab, draws up a stool, and sits at the head of the table. It is none other than Mr. Brotherton himself. Horrified, I look to Jack, and he looks to me. Clearly, we didn't know that this was going to happen, but it transpires that Mr. Brotherhood was the founder of the Dungeons and Dragons club that takes place in his science lab. Suddenly all the pieces are falling together, and a dawning realization of horror sweeps across the table as we suddenly realize that Mr. Brotherton, the angriest man in the world, to our mind, is our dungeon master. There is a collective gasp as he sits at this table. Silence has fallen across the room. Mr. Brotherton wordlessly produces a DM screen in front of himself. He pours his dice onto the table, opens a book, and only then does he lift his gaze to acknowledge that we're even there. And he just jumps straight in. You have all been assembled here because perhaps together, perhaps on your own, you have managed to scrape together a little renown enough to be trusted with the task that is now ahead of you. You must travel northeast to a mine that has fallen into the hands of a powerful and mysterious enemy. Dark magic festers within these tunnels, and it is up to you and you alone to investigate and destroy the source of this morbid and deathly power. I remember being sat there at that science table with my mouth agape. The beginning of this campaign, the beginning of this story, delivered by a man of such standing and such strict attitude, made this feel like the most earnest, gritty, and important task I've been ever told to commit in my entire life. Obviously, I was young at the time, but I was transfixed. I was instantly drawn into this world. The fact that it was this man who radiates this fearful power is now giving us this mission. It was the strangest and most transfixing start to a game I could ever dream of. And this was my first ever game. And I was just sat there in disbelief. Utter disbelief with just the spell that had been cast upon us all. So off we went. We were quickly thrust a map which denoted the location of this dread mine, and we found our party for the first time ever, a collection of level 1 players, none of us having ever played this game at all, heading towards our first ever quest. We travel for some time. Spirits are high. We travel through a wonderful landscape that Mr. Brotherton describes. He speaks of the sloping great mountains in the distance, a vast forest that decorates a beautiful valley that glistens under a golden sun. All of this, we were yet to realize, was merely there to lull us into a false sense of security. It wasn't long before we arrived at the location noted on the map and we see, nestled between two mountains, the opening to a mine. Its entryway is dark. Before it, skulls have been mounted onto sticks outside. This place looks terrifying. A very, very cold, light breeze echoes down the entryway to this vile place. And we all look at each other, and for the first time we decide our marching order. And it just so happens it was Tyranno the dwarf that went in first. Not afraid of going into the mountains, for surely this was to be where he would shine. I saw this opportunity and I leapt at it. After trudging down this long, dark tunnel into the heart of the mountain itself, after what seems like an age, we finally enter this open, hewn cave, hewn out of the rock, and we are presented with this sight of vast pulleys and levers that would be used to lift heavy shards of rock out of this mine and up to the surface level. This was when I was asked to make the first roll of my entire D&D career. I'm asked to do a spot check. I fail. Tyranno the Dwarf's first roll is a critical fail, and he trips one of these ropes attached to one of these pulleys that has been fashioned into a makeshift trap. There is a shudder as a massive slab of stone drops out of the air, and Mr. Brotherton demands us all to make reflex saving throws. Tyranno the Dwarf succeeds. Zidane, the sorcerer who is standing behind him, does not. The stone smashes on top of Zidane and basically knocks him to like 0 in 1. He is down already. Mr. Brotherton says, make a fortitude save. We all roll. Most of us fail, and he goes, ha 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 ha! Suddenly his voice booming across the table. This man who takes joy in those punishments in the classroom is now taking joy in unleashing hell upon our party. We all fail the fortitude save. He says, roll a d6. We roll a d6. It comes up a 6, and we go, is that good? And he says, you are now deaf for 6 hours. We were like, oh! Thankfully, Jenna, who is playing our druid at the time, is able to heal Zidane, so he is able to get back up, but he's still badly injured, and most of us are now deaf. We can't hear a thing. Yet we continue stumbling deeper into this mine. We open up into another room and we see a narrow path that's cut into this cliff face that just drops into the darkness, into this abyss, this place that has clearly been sheet mined, layer after layer after layer after layer, down into the darkness. And we begin shifting, balancing on this narrow ledge, trying to get across, still trying to get to the source of this foul magic that festers in the heart of this place. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Brotherton yells once again, make a spot check! Most of us fail as kobolds from a ledge above jump out and start firing crossbow bolts at us, ambushing us and taking us completely by surprise. The surprise round decimates us. We are screwed. I remember Gavin's min-maxed half-elf fighter just took like 6 arrows to the chest and 1 to the neck. He is killed outright in the surprise round and plunges into the abyss. That is one player out for the count. Gone. Done. We are looking in horror and we try and attack back, but we don't know really what to do. I remember having a few hand axes on Tyranno, and he gives like a desperate attempt to throw an axe at a kobold, but like it just bounces off and uselessly falls into the chasm. Grug, Jack's character, I remember, begins picking up rocks. He's not blessed with having a ranged weapon and starts flinging rocks at the kobolds in an attempt to ease their assault. At the end, our spellcasters, and I believe we had like a ranger or something, I don't remember, but we were able to beat them in the ranged combat in the end. But we lost a party member, and we had to keep going. The kobolds were eventually killed, and we press on into the darkness. I remember looking over at Mr. Brotherton throughout this entire experience, and I saw a side of him that I had never seen before. This man, this pillar of stern poise, is grinning from ear to ear. Obviously, still being harsh and outlandish, but really having the time of his life. It strikes me now, looking back, that Mr. Brotherton was clearly raised on D&D old school, you know? Many different DMs have many different types of playstyle. I can tell that Mr. Brotherton came from the era less so about, like, oh, we're trying to collaboratively tell a story. No, this is like 70s hardcore. You have your HP. If it's gone, you're out of the, you know, you don't get last words, okay? You are killed, you are gone, you know? Old school D&D, Gygaxian. And he was clearly loving every minute of it and grinning to himself as if this was not even the beginning of the horrors that awaited us in this mine. What waited for us next was arguably even worse. Our party opens into this room and we see that it is waist deep in water. This section of the mine has flooded, perhaps from a mountain source river that is pouring into this old abandoned place. And this made fighting the bunch of goblins in this place so much harder. They were on race positions once again, and we were having to wade through this water. Our movement speed halved, trying to reach these foes. We are pushed to our absolute limit. And looking back on this, I'm like, this was a level one, like, mission. But Mr. Brotherton was just like, if you make it through, then fair play. If you don't, yeah. Like, this cavalier attitude to our first and beloved characters' fate. Finally, weakened but determined, our party enter the final room. And we see before us a large pillar of rock that juts into the air. There are a number of goblins waiting for us, but then we spot something that's even worse. Mr. Brotherhood looks particularly pleased with himself, for upon this pillar, clad in messy brown robes, stands an orc who lifts his hand into the air. A powerful magic blast explodes towards our party. We are facing an orc sorcerer. And behind him is this swirling magical force that he's clearly been manipulating to some evil dark purpose to make sure that these mines can never be used again, perhaps to enforce some curse that he wants to remain in this land forevermore. And bravely, defiantly, our party rolls initiative and we go into one final combat. Naturally, the orc sorcerer, having already fired a blast at us, goes first. This, I don't even remember what spell it was. Maybe it was a bunch of magic missiles. Maybe it was, I don't know, a firebolt. God knows. But this spell arcs across this room and connects straight into the face Jenna, our druid, our healer, and is instantly killed. Bam! There goes our healer. We look in dismay, knowing now that there isn't anyone who's going to be able to heal us. There's no one that's going to be able to buff us in any way. We are on our own. Jenna, disheartened, folding her character sheet. The battle continues, and our forces meet those of the goblins, and the fight is incredible. Tyranno, however, my character, the dwarf, I have a plan. I think to myself, there's no way we're getting out of this if that orc is going to be stood on top of that pillar, just nailing us with spell after spell after spell. So, Tyranno begins doing something that he becomes fabled for doing so in games that follow this. Tyranno essentially is busy for half of the combat, setting up what he's about to do. This is what he does. He charges through the lines of the goblins. He's with Jack's half-orc character at this point, and he just pushes his way through the goblins, gets to that stone pillar, and begins climbing it. It's a really tall pillar, and it takes most of the combat. At this point, the party's kind of neck and neck with the goblins. Some of them are getting more headway, more goblins are being killed on the other side of the room. It's a toss-up of which way this fight is going to go, and yet Tyranno is still busy climbing up this massive pinnacle of rock that juts from the ground, trying to pull himself up to be level with this orc. Finally, Tyranno has made it to the top. He looks down and he sees his friends neck and neck in this fight with the goblins. It looks like the tide is turning. It looks like the heroes may win the day. It is then that Tyranno receives a spell right to the chest, basically knocking him to like maybe 3 health, maybe less. This orc sorcerer leering at him, and I look to Mr. Brotherton and I say, "Sir, I am going to bull rush that orc. If I'm going down, I'm taking him with me." And Tyranno charges this orc, connecting against him hard with his shoulder, and both he and the orc topple from the pillar and collapse down, smashing into rocks on the way down, and down, hit the ground. Tyranno is on the verge of death. He is out of the count. He is in the minus figures at this point, but not quite dead. The orc, however, stands up. Bloody, beaten. He's taken a few arrows from the ranged members of the party as well, and he's leering down on my character, and I'm so sad. My first ever character, Tyranno the Dwarf, faithful Tyranno the Dwarf, is now going to get coup de grace by this foul creature. And it is then, from the dust of battle, that Jack's character, Grug, the half-orc, charges and connects to the side of this half-orc, killing him in one strike. Clearly the fall damage had been enough to bring this orc into a weakened state, and he was slain. The battle was over. We had triumphed, but indeed at a cost. I remember thinking about the victory that we had won, and it almost felt like a defiant act against Mr. Brotherton and his forces of darkness. But we were all very surprised at his reaction. Mr. Brotherton could not have been happier at our success. He was overjoyed that we had overcome this dungeon, and he congratulated us. We were able to loot the body of the orc, and Tyranno, for his bravery, was the one who was able to take this shining +1 mace, a masterwork mace. I was so happy. To this day, it is still probably my most favorite thing, my favorite bit of loot I've ever received in D&D, because it felt so earned and so special. It was then that one of the remaining characters, I think, I can't remember who it was, it might have been a paladin we had or something, decided to take this vial, this strange vial. And as we were talking about like the end of the session and we got our reward and it was said, oh, how we went back and we were the praise of the town and a great feast was held in our honor. The paladin had this bottle, this strange looking bottle, and opened it, smelt it, and then took a drink of it. We were obviously still very new to D&D at this time. The poison that the paladin drank killed him instantly. Even after we'd left the dungeon, it was still killing people in our party. We were like, the paladin died at the feast, and that is where we left it. That was the end of that session, and we were like, and it was just an incredible experience. Being able to share something like that with an individual that we thought, was just this terrifying person whose existence was merely existed to make our lives hell in class, we saw a completely different side of him. And it was due to that intensity that he brought to that game. I feel that it made obviously a lasting memory. This was years and years ago, yet I still remember it vividly. My first game of D&D, and it's thanks to Mr. Brotherton. We went on to have other adventures. We had 2 more adventures that Mr. Brotherton DM'd for us before we then got a DM who was a student at the time, and then Mr. Brotherton went and started running a game for a newer bunch of people, another generation. In one of them, we were still making mistakes. Like one of them, we had a bounty to collect. We had to hunt down an ogre that had been preying on travelers on this road. And we hunted down the ogre and we killed the ogre. But we didn't take off its head. We didn't take back any proof that we had killed it. So Mr. Brotherton said, yeah, prove it. And we were like, oh no. We rushed back days travel back to where we killed this ogre. The ogre's body had gone. We were like, fuck's sake, that was the end of that adventure. We then went on another one where we had to navigate a treacherous swamp and find a manor which was basically controlling these dark minions, including a mummy, this sentient mansion. That in that fight, once again, Tyranno did his signature move of not being involved in most of the fight because he was too busy trying to put his armor on, as they had foolishly decided to sleep in this manor. Morons! But these are all vital lessons that we needed to learn in terms of the etiquette and the tactics that come into play when playing the world's greatest role-playing game. So that was the story of the first step. My first step into the world of Dungeons and Dragons and the world of role-playing games in general. And I've never looked back. It's been a hobby that I have enjoyed and loved for the majority of my life now, it seems. So I would like to extend my humblest thanks to TheWriter for this opportunity of doing this channel invasion. It's been really good fun. If you would like to see me tell more stories of my D&D adventures that I've both run and played in, you can go over to my channel, Performance Check. I have a series called Lore Drop, which is essentially a shameless rip-off of D&D stories that I now tell with, hopefully, Tony's blessing. I also do a whole bunch of different tip videos, and I also have a bunch of actual plays as well, primarily being my campaign, The Lore Keepers, which I run online with some very good friends of mine from the States and Ireland. It's a really, really epic story, so I urge you to go and check that out if you've enjoyed this. Thanks again to Tony TheWriter for this channel invasion opportunity, and make sure that you come back here next time for another edition of D&D Stories. Keep gaming.
Oh no, Titan, you're on camera. You're on camera, Titan. Look, see all the people. Oh, He is not having none of this, are you? He doesn't like the bright lights. Titan, look. Look at the internets. No? Do we tell him your theme song? Get that off. Oh no, Titan. Titan's thunder paws. He's a kitty and his paws are white. See? Titan thunder paws. He's a kitty and he turned out right. No? No. Okay. Oh, he's so abused.